Yes, so tonight we want to talk about the records management as part of our training. And again, tonight will not be as practical in the sense that we're going to look at different filing systems, but we are going to look at our policy and the rationale behind keeping records and what records and vital records. So that is what we hope to achieve in tonight's presentation. So I don't think we'll spend that long tonight. I think it's going to be a fairly short presentation, especially compared to last night and the previous presentations that I presented. So I think let's start with the conference level and proper record management and why it is vital and crucial and what it can do for us. So just a few introductory thoughts, and then we'll go to church level and then maybe focus on some legislation relevant, not a comprehensive list, but just some legislation. And then we will specifically focus on the policy, the SAU working policy relating to records, and try and explain that and see how we can apply it at our local church level. And so I think firstly, a proper record management ensures accountability and transparency, as it maintains proper financial, membership, and administrative records to ensure ethical governance. I think it's also for historical preservation to protect the church's heritage, legacy, by preserving minutes, decisions, reports. And maybe let me add to that the General Conference has started a project of recording the church's heritage and legacy at various levels. So local churches are encouraged to write up the history of the local congregation. When did it start? Who were the various pastors from when to when? Even the leadership of the church, some landmarks or highlights from the church's history, and that those be published as articles on the electronic encyclopedia of the church. So once a article is submitted, it is then properly reviewed, and then eventually, if it meets all the standards, it will be taken up there. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to record our history, which are often lost. The records are not always properly kept, and then we can't remember who did what where. We can't learn, and we can't be encouraged by our own history. So I think the historical preservation is very important from that point of view. And then there are legal and compliance requirements, to ensure that we adhere to the internal church policies, the various employment laws and legislation, and also several financial regulations. And then it would help for operational efficiency, because if there are proper records, these organized records help in smooth church administration and decision-making. It also helps to preserve organizational memory. And often, if we lose organizational memory, we struggle. We keep on doing the same thing over and over again. We keep on reinventing the wheel. Whilst if there are proper documentation, proper records to reflect on, it can greatly assist us with organizational memory, so that we can build on that and move forward and not keep on reinventing. Those are just a few thoughts from proper record management at conference. It's not a comprehensive approach. We just want to give an introduction. So similarly, at local church level, proper record management is important because we've got membership records, and we need to track baptisms, transfers, attendance for accurate reporting. And as we indicated earlier when we discussed the ACMS system, as we discussed in some of the other presentations, not only is it important to have accurate statistical records, but it also helps with strategic planning, budget planning, resource allocation. And it is important to have accurate and proper records in terms of membership. Then there's financial stewardship, an important principle. The proper handling of tithe and offering records would uphold the integrity and transparency. Financial stewardship principle, or the reason for keeping these records. And as I said, the proper handling of tithe and offering records not only uphold the integrity and transparency, but in a volunteer organization, when you receive funds from donors, if they lose trust in how we manage the funds received, they tend to lose the appetite to keep on making donations. And apart from that, as stewards of the Lord, we should ensure that we are faithful stewards, not only in receiving financial means or funds and resources, but also in the way in which we record it, and also and especially in the way in which we utilize the funds entrusted in our care. So proper records in this area is extremely important. Then the church board and business meetings, there we would like to keep the minutes of of the resolutions or the actions taken to ensure the continuity, again, in leadership transitions. And last night when we discussed the minutes, there were some questions raised in terms of, as a decision binding and for how long and what. And one of the comments I made, and it will probably add in here, is if we write proper minutes where you have a proper introduction with under the first section of the motion, whereas, and give the rationale, what necessitated that action or motion. And then if the motion can be extremely accurate and very comprehensive, because often we assume that people know what we have in mind, and our minutes are written almost in shorthand. And later, when people revisit the minutes, it is very difficult to establish the original intent or even exactly what was intended with that motion. And so not only from a legal point of view is it important to have comprehensive minutes, but again, if you want to reflect back, you do a research or historical research to try and understand, how did we arrive at the point where we are today? What impacted, what influenced? And often there are extremely important information contained in a research like that. But if we didn't record it in the first place, the information is lost. And so, again, then the minutes of these meetings are extremely important. And then in terms of asset management, ensuring proper documentation of the church's properties and assets. And maybe just a word here, especially with regard to the occupation certificates of churches. Very often these documentation, for some other reason, are not accurately kept or on file. They're often lost. And the challenge with a document like a occupation certificate is if you lose it, and it was issued years ago, the municipal regulations and bylaws determine the process of issuing a new one, but they won't issue you a new one to say, well, we've lost our previous one. You will have to meet the requirements of the new laws and bylaws, which has changed. It's different electricity standards and plumbing standards and building safety and all sorts of other requirements. So if that document is lost, then you can't use the building because there's no occupancy certificate. And the only way to get it is to go through the whole process, which could be a very expensive process. Again, giving or spending money that we could have utilized for evangelism or other purposes. So that's just one example. So it's very important that we keep, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later in terms of these records. I think in terms of the South African legislative framework, um, I think we can't talk about keeping records and information without mentioning the Protection of Personal Information Act to ensure that members' personal data is handled legally and ethically. Um, I know that there will be a presentation on this in particular. There's Brother Sabello and Klubu is tasked to ensure the POPI compliance of the conference. We are registered. There are documentation, and they're in the process of filtering that down to local church level with training and documentation. The next one is probably the Companies Act and Non-Profit Organization Act, where it applies. We have registered NPOs, not churches in particular, but we do have NPOs. They must maintain, in terms of their acts, proper financial and governance records. There are certain tax compliance issues with SARS, that where proper financial records are required to maintain a tax-exempt status. Then there are labor laws. Some churches employ laborers or cleaners or gardeners, and then there would be compliance to the labor law and the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And so if congregations do employ, there should be proper records in terms of the contractual documents, the employment documents, the minutes, and the UIF documentation, and et cetera, in order not to place the organization or the local church at risk. So just a few, as I said, not a comprehensive list, but just an indication. We want to talk about the importance of keeping and maintaining proper records at local church level. And so in the SAU working policy, there's the policy BA 60 that deals with the retention and safeguarding of records. And so for the next few minutes, I want us to go through the policy. I'll be reading some of those sections, comment on it here and there, and see how we can develop a retention schedule for the local congregation, keeping certain vital documentation. There are for what period, and once we're done with that, those documents need to be destroyed in a very specific way, especially when they contain personal identification of members or information of members. And so the first section of this policy, the BA 60, is then section 05 that deals with record management. And so the policy states that normal operation of denominational organizations and institutions in the production and the accumulation of large volumes of files and records of varying degrees of administrative and historical value. In order to preserve documents for permanent value and to avoid unnecessary preservation of unneeded materials, each organization will find it advantageous to establish a record management program. And so it is advised that even at local level, we consider the whole matter of record management and the safekeeping. Often we find, when there's a transition of leaders, new first elder, new church clerk, new treasurer, often it is a tremendous search and a burden to try and find the records. And sometimes the records are not carefully or stored in a safe environment, and they're either damaged with water, sometimes with fire, or they get stolen, or they get missing, and it's got all sorts of implications when it happens. And so this aims to try and attempt to safeguard and make sure that we keep the necessary records for the prescribed times as we might need them. Then it continues to say administrators of organizations should evaluate the legal, financial, and cultural worth of various types of files and records produced in all offices. And at local church, it'll probably be at all departments. The political vicissitudes through which the world is constantly passing serious affect property rights. For example, the demand of proper preservation of denominational property records, and already referred to something like occupation certificates and other property documents. Corporate papers, board minutes not only tell the history of an organization, but they may call upon, in cases of litigation. Many other documentations and general files seem to be of little value beyond the initial retention period, but they grow rapidly in historical value as time passes and even serve future administrators in restudying issues and problems. Hence, not only is there a policy at general conference level, at division level, and at conference level that we use, but the church should probably adopt similar principles in trying to preserve the records of the local congregation. Then, in terms of the retention of the records, in BA 610, the next section, it says each organization and institution shall establish a records center, that is a storage place to produce or to protect documents from fire, deterioration, and unauthorized access. These records centers shall house those non-current documents or files designated for either short-term or permanent storage. The record center is not to be used for the storage of current files, and that is to be understood as those that are consulted several times a year in the normal course of business. So it seems there's two types of retention in mind. The one is a safe place where records can permanently be kept. And it seems that an officer's house, a treasurer's house, or a church clerk's house is not the best place to keep the permanent records in terms of a record center that must be established. And then the other records that we use, the current year's minutes, the current year's financial documentation, they also need to be well protected and well preserved so that when we finish accessing them on a regular basis, once the financial year ends, the year comes to an end, they will then be moved to the record center for safekeeping. Then it continues to say a record retention schedule available from the General Conference Office of Archives and Statistics shall be considered by the respective denominational organizations and institutions, and with the revision that might be indicated by the local need or varying legal requirements adopted by the governing boards or committees. And again, it emphasizes that the need and the importance of a records retention schedule. We'll show you an example shortly when the policy refers to that as to what or how such a records retention schedule could look like. And then documents and files stored in the record center awaiting later destruction shall be boxed in such a way as to make clear the date of their destruction under the provision of a record retention schedule approved by the organization's executive committee or board. So normally your church board will recommend, and finally your business meeting will take the action in terms of records that needs to be preserved permanently and which ones needs to be properly destroyed in terms of in compliance of things like the Poppy Act, etc. And so in the SAU working policy, I know the screen is small, I'll blow it up just now and show it to you. They've got a schedule of documents for the use of the conferences and the division. And so you will see that there's the record, and then whether the retention is permanent, whether it's temporarily, and then whether it was an old use of the microphone. Pastor Eugene, I see there are some individuals in the waiting room. Then we don't use microphone anymore so much. So we use digital ways, so we preserve our records in digital form on hard disks or on clouds. And so that's what this section will refer to. So corporate papers, memorandum of articles of association, property records and deeds, for instance, is permanent. Contracts, permanent. Trust agreements, annuities, wills, etc., permanent. Audited financial statements must be preserved permanently. Quarterly financial statements, monthly financial statements. The first one is the quarterly ones is 15 years, the monthly ones for 6 years. The financial statements, higher organizations must retain quarterly financial statements of sundries for 6 years at least. Audit working papers, salary and expense review, payroll. Local churches don't necessarily deal with it unless they employed, as I said, a gardener or a cleaner. Then the same would apply. The service record of the individuals, asset registers, security ledgers, and it indicates what the scope of retention would be. And it continues with some of the financial ones, nominal ledgers, receipt and petty cash, vouchers, journals, checks. I think it's an old one that we no longer use, returned by the bank, must be kept, should have been kept by a certain years. The bank statements and reconciliations, sales invoices, insurance policies after expiration, 6 years at least. And so it continues. And you can see again when it gets to item 24 minutes, the minutes should be permanently kept. So we cannot destroy, or we should not destroy, minutes of church boards and of business meetings. There should always be a permanent record of that. And then the higher organizations should retain minutes of the subsidiaries. Then statistical reports. I was a little bit confused when I read the SAU policy with this one. It says 26 statistical reports permanently, and then statistical reports 6 years. So I'm not quite sure what they had in mind there. Maybe it's a typo, or they have a different classification. And although one can say that, I think the idea is that a church should have a schedule of the documents that they have under their control, which should be preserved and when it should be destroyed, so that everybody is clear and again you can attend to it. I think if this is not deliberately done, then we tend to find that it's nobody's business, and then the documents are lost. And then we start searching for these documents when we might need them, only to find that we've lost our occupational certificates or certificates of occupation, etc. And then it continues with the discussion on the records retention, BA 6010, and it says, fourthly, documents and files to be preserved permanently may be kept in a hard copy or microform. I guess when they revisit the SAU working policy, they'll probably say on a cloud or data hard drive space at the discretion of the appropriate governing body, a church board at local level. The storage must be in the same storage facility with less permanent items, but should be physically separate from them and clearly labeled. And so again, it seems when you have a hard copy, you save it somewhere, and you try and keep your digital copies separate from that in case there's some disaster, fire, or whatever damage to the permanent records, so that at least your other digital records are not destroyed. And I think that's why it's probably helpful to have the cloud storage as well. And last night we spoke about, the Google Drive and email accounts that the church has been assigned, and that would be a good start to at least share copies of the records like minutes and other important financial information and documents, so that there's always a copy available on those platforms. And then the policy BA 6015 deals with vital records. and it says that all organizations and institutions shall give special attention to the permanent preservation and security of their own vital records. Now, they list such as articles of incorporation, constitutions, bylaws, minutes of boards or governing committees, property records, all property documentation. We should have a copy of on file. Other legal documents, and also church properties that are of an intellectual nature, such as trademarks and copyrights. Those documents should be preserved. And then this one, I think, in the copy and paste, they probably didn't do justice to this particular clause, but let's go through it. It says the Secretary of the South African Union Conference shall forward to the South African Indian Ocean Division Archives a true copy of the articles of incorporation of all legal bodies within the division, and the division committee minutes and the board minutes of the division institutions. I think the intention was probably to say within the union and the division committee minutes and the board minutes of the union institutions. But I think the idea is that the lower organization, in our case, the union, must give a copy of all of that and ensure that there's a copy at the division archive center, again, to ensure the documents are preserved and in order for later access, and if we need to consult them again. Then it says that the chief financial officer or other designated officer. So if you do not assign somebody specifically, this is the job of the treasurer or the chief financial officer, CFO, at conferences. In this case, we talk of the SAU, the union conference shall index, identify, and file property records as follows. So now it gets into the detail of what property records should be there. All deeds, mortgages, contracts, and other documents covering the acquisition and holding of real fixed property by any Seventh-day Adventist organization or institution within the SAU's territory, and documents of an intellectual nature relating to church properties such as trademarks and copyrights, documents relating to local churches, primary schools, and residents shall be maintained by the union or conference mission field organizations. Okay, so what this means is that at the union level, that the chief financial officer of the union must keep a record of these as indicated. Now, this last section indicates that documents relating to local churches, to primary schools, to residences, that shall be maintained by the union. If it's union institutions or conferences or mission or field, but we only have conferences mainly. And so the appropriate conference would be responsible to retain those documents of the institutions. But then again, it's also very important that the local organization have their own record of these documents. Sometimes we need a new compliance, there's a bylaw regulation of change, or we want to open a Meals on Wheels branch, and then they require some of these documentations. And then it's a tremendous struggle to try and get hold of it. Normally the local church board must have a business meeting action to go to the conference. The conference must advise that to the union, to set who holds the documents, and then they will give power of attorney so that we can approach the local authorities. And there's a long delay. Whilst if we had a copy of these documents in place, it would save us a lot of time and trouble if we need those documentations. And a lot of these documents are often used not only when we want to buy and sell the property, but also when, as I said, we want to extend the building, or when there's major repair works, some of these documents are needed. And it could be needed for all sorts of reasons. It's also required by the insurer to have copies of these documentation. And so It continues to say that the list or index of such documents with a brief description of the relevant documentation, such as the location, the name of the legal body holding the title, the original cost, the date required, or the date required, and a summary of major improvements or additions shall be maintained, and a copy transmitted annually to the South African Indian Ocean Division Archives. And I'm not convinced that we have up-to-date, accurate records that reflects the information here. So the local congregation, when they gather and keep this information, gives copy to the conference. The conference has a filing system to keep it on record, and then they escalate the necessary documentation to the union, to SETCOM in our case, and then the union to the division. And there's the same expectation from the division to also send things to the general conference, so that there's preservation of the record. So although the policy speaks about the union and the conferences, it doesn't mean that the local church should not keep the record. And often the local churches are frustrated by the system and by that time it takes to try and get power of attorney. Decision making in church is very slow. So normally, as I said, from local church to the conference, it will be a business meeting decision as required by policy. Then a committee at the conference need to advance it to the union, and so from the business meeting to the conference committee meeting takes time, and then once it eventually gets to the right desk at the union, flooded with requests and all sorts of administrative duties, there it is a little bit delayed, and so it can take quite a long time. But as I said, if we had copies of those records, often it would not be necessitated to follow a tedious process to try and get hold of documentations that might be urgently required for transactions and for all sorts of activities at local church level. And then the policy continues to speak about the ownership of records, and I think this is also important. Again, with POPI in mind and with confidentiality in mind, that we consider the ownership of records. So when an organization records ideas and information on paper or other medium, it retains the ownership of that record. Both the information and the medium on which it is recorded are a source to be protected and preserved or destroyed according to the approved record management principles. So a good example of this would be the church board minutes and the business meeting minutes. So it is not the property of the individual members that happen to have a copy of that. The church retains the ownership of that. And so when one deal with these documentation, you need to deal with them in harmony of the principles and the policies of the owner of those documents. What also makes it more important from a local church level and with the POPI Act in mind is that we have a duty and an obligation to preserve records and to ensure that especially personal information in our possession is safely recorded, it's accurately recorded, and that there's no undue access or that the information is not unlawfully shared with a third party. And therefore it makes it more important. But because the local church is then the owner, should there be a dispute, the church could attract a lot of negative or undue legal risk as far as that is concerned. And so it's better not to go in that direction. Then it says all records, files, and documents, including correspondence created by the employee in the course of employment, are the property of the employing organization and shall at all times continue in the ownership and control of the employing organization for its use, preservation, destruction according to its record management policies. So when you think of including correspondence, it means the email. So the church has an email account, and correspondence are flowing in and out of that. That does not belong to the individual operating it. It's an official account of the organization, and hence it's the property of the organization, and the organization should have access to that. So on my official Potgieter @cc .adventist.org email account, it's an official account. It's supposed to be for business only, and if my employer needs to have access to that, it's their property, and hence they can have access to that. So I must be very sure that I don't have their unauthorized or private emails in my official email account. Then under this section 2A, it says the term records includes, but is not limited to, information recorded on paper, film, electronic media, sound media, as well as charts, drawings, maps. It will probably include photographs and things like that. Excluded from this policy are materials closely related to an employee's professional career or graduate education, such as sermons or sermon files or graduate research material. So Pastor Eugene, you can relax. They will not collect your sermons and give them to me that I can preach them. Those are excluded from this exercise. And then lastly, in terms of the ownership of the records, in addition to the informational value of organizational documents, files, and other records, some items have a literary value, although this value also resides with the employer. It may be by written agreement be vested in the employee to share with the employee. And again, when we go to the local church level, that will be between, again, the members instead of the employee. So it will be between the church board and the business meeting and the members for that relationship to be established. So what I've hoped to do tonight was to share the policy with you, to share some of the important principles with you, and I think end with a recommendation that even if we draft a template schedule for the record retention as the one I shared that's on the SAU policy, that could be applicable for local churches, that local churches, church boards will consider this item and then not only have a record retention schedule, but also ensure that the records in their possession of the organization is safely preserved, that no unauthorized access can be gained to it, and that we preserve that for the reasons mentioned earlier in this presentation. But Pastor Eugene, I think we've reached the end of our presentation tonight. And